Hey everybody, this is Kira Davis from Just Listen to Yourself right here on the FCB Radio Network, and I've got a great problem. I need a new theme song for the show. So I am asking listeners to send in their submissions for new theme songs for Just Listen to Yourself. If you are a musician or a songwriter or just somebody who wants to try their hand at it, go ahead and send us a song that you think could be used for the theme of Just Listen to Yourself. You could have the chance to win $150, but better than that, your song could get an official release on the Orchard and Sony records. That's right. The Orchard and Sony records will release your song as an official single, and it'll get played all across the FCB radio network to start and maybe beyond. Send your entry to JLTY at protonmail.com. Contest closes May 31st.
This is the FCB Radio Network, home of the best personalities and where real talk lives. Online at fcbradio.com. FCB.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Just Listen to Yourself with Kira Davis. I am your host, Kira Davis, and this is a podcast where we take hot topics, hot button issues, and we draw their talking points all the way out to their logical conclusion. It's an exercise in persuasion. It's an exercise in learning to understand what we believe so we can better communicate it. Or sometimes what we believe doesn't really match the evidence or the facts involved in the situation. And, you know, sometimes when we examine those things, we can change how we think about things. So I guess this is a thinking exercise. I say it every week, and this week's no different. This week I want to talk about fossil fuels. I've been going back and forth. I got a couple of great suggestions from my people in Davis Nation. I've got a growing community over at locals.com, Davis Nation, and it's censorship free. We're dealing with a lot of that in the media industry these days. Some topics will get you banned from certain social media platforms or some positions on some topics. Even today, there was news that the pop star Demi Lovato came out as, quote, non-binary. And a friend of mine who is a part of the LGBT community, always is very up to date on what's going on in the community, he tweeted that he wanted to discuss Demi Lovato's new gender status, but he didn't feel free to on Twitter because even to discuss it in terms of gender would possibly get his account suspended or banned. We're not able to completely discuss freely everything on social media these days. And you can go back to my episodes on censorship and banning bad ideas and why I think that's a bad idea. You can go back and listen to my several episodes on that to know how I feel about that. But I just wanted to mention it because there are places to go. Now, why would you pay more money to go to a place like Davis Nation? Because it is a subscription service. And I want to let you know that that is the direction that most media is moving into, whether it's left-wing media or right-wing media, everything in between, because we realize that we can't necessarily depend on platforms like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, which have become very important in our industry and for good reason. And they've been great for our industry. So I don't want to criticize them on that front. They have been great for our industry. But a lot of us are realizing we can't depend on those platforms because you never know when something's going to trigger an algorithm or someone's going to get a bug up their butt and report you. Or maybe you don't necessarily want to be sharing these things and sharing your thoughts on these issues in an area where all your friends and family can see. So a lot of us are protecting our platforms by moving to paid platforms. Content takes effort. I know that I make it seem effortless, but it is not. It takes a lot of time. This is a job. This really is a job. And so for a lot of us, we have to create other avenues to earn steady income and dependable income so we can keep talking to you, keep exploring ideas, keep doing whatever it is we do. So I certainly don't expect you to pay extra for content. You can enjoy free content like this here on JLTY to your heart's delight. And the way we get around charging for content like this is through advertising, right? And that's another way we can be be beholden to the views of others, because we can't necessarily talk about subjects that are going to tick off our advertisers. So we're free of that as well when you pay for other content. So I know you have a lot of important stuff to do with your money. And why would you want to spend it on my little community over at davisnation.locals.com? And that's totally up to you. Like, no hard feelings. Believe me, I get it. I'm very picky about where I choose to give my money when it comes to spending on content, but I do give money. I have a budget for myself. Actually, it's $50 a year. It's not much. I've got one or two very cheap subscriptions to a couple of sites that I like. And then I save the rest for $2, $3, $5 donations here when my favorite bloggers or pundits are doing fundraising. And because I know the effort that it takes. And in that way, I'm kind of spreading the love around, but not costing myself too much. I'm supporting free thinking, free media, but at the same time, I'm recognizing that the effort that it takes does require financial support. So that's what you're paying for when you pay for davisnation.locals.com. Of course, you are under no obligation to be there. I certainly don't blame you if you have no interest in it, but it's there for you if you want it. And one of the things we do over there is a lot of times if I'm feeling dry for subjects, I'll go over there and I'll just see what my community members are talking about, what's important to them. So they gave me a lot of good food for thought. What I wanted to do today, because I just wasn't necessarily feeling today's subject that much, but I'd already prepared for it. What I wanted to do today was the price of college. That was one of the suggestions that was brought up in the room, and I liked it, and it was brought up in a couple of different ways. So I'm going to do that, but I didn't have enough time to pull together the research properly so that I can source what some of the things I'm thinking about it are. I just didn't have time, and I need to get this episode to you. So today we're doing fossil fuels. Next week, I think we're going to do the price of college admissions, unless something incredibly pressing comes up before then. Sometimes that happens, right? Something happens in the media and then I'm like, I got to talk about this. But I want to thank my community at Davis Nation for always being there for me with ideas, with conversation, letting me bounce off things. And you guys are always up for the discussion. It's an awesome community. I love it. And go ahead and join us over there. I'm aiming for 100 new subscribers for the month of June. 100 new subscribers. So, and the other thing I'm aiming for is 1,000 reviews on the JLTY iTunes page. So if you're a listener on the iTunes platform and you like this show and you've never really given it a rating or a review, I would appreciate it. All right, business aside, let's go. Fossil fuels. So fossil fuels are kind of in the news lately, and they're always in the news. You know, I've discussed this. I believe I've done climate change on this show, and I've discussed that I am the child of a hippie. I'm the child of an environmentalist. Environmentalism has been a big theme in my life, my whole life. Even though we don't share the same political views, it's something that she has instilled in me, the idea of caring for the world around you. And as a Christian, that attitude has only multiplied because I believe in being a good steward of your environment, of the world. This is our home. This is the home that God has given us. Just like you don't like to have a trashy house, you don't want to trash your earthly home. So we certainly have responsibilities to this earth. I want to say that from the top. That is the angle I come at when it comes to the environment. But I also believe that the environment is here for people. And if there are no people, then the environment does not matter. It's sort of if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one around to hear it, does it make a sound? It's the same thing. There are a lot of people. A lot of times you can see, you can find TV shows and History Channel's got this great series. I don't know if it's great, but it's interesting. Life After People or Earth After People, something like that. Funny story, true story. They needed to film in cities that looked abandoned. And Gary, Indiana was one of the cities that they went to film in because the whole city looks like Life After People, even though there's still like 65,000 people there. But there seems to be like this fantasy about, the earth would just return back to normal and would be perfect if it weren't for people, as if people aren't supposed to be the part of this equation. Obviously, Earth would return back to a completely natural state. We would probably, we wouldn't be worried about anything at all because we wouldn't be here. But there would be no carbon emissions and all of that to be worried about. But then there'd be no people to be worried about. Is the Earth even the Earth without people? So I think it's important to view environmentalism and the environment through the lens of humanity. It is here for us to use, to help us thrive, to help us live, to enjoy. I can't tell you how ticked off it makes me when we have reserved all this land for national parks, and then you go to a national park and they tell you that there's parts of the national park you're not allowed to visit because we don't want to stress the environment. Then what is the point? If the beauty of the landscape cannot be enjoyed by human eyes, then what is the point? The environment is for us. We protect it for us. So to protect it from human eyes seems like, who are we saving it for? You know what I mean? Who are we saving the environment for? If no one can ever see it, then who are we saving it for? And I also would dispute the fact that letting humans see would be a bad thing. That even if the area did become degraded in some way by human foot traffic, I mean, you can avoid stuff like, I get it. You don't want people littering or like touching stuff with their greasy hands and degrading murals and stuff like that. I get that. But you can protect from some of the worst aspects of human nature while still allowing humans to engage with nature and the environment. I think it's a bad idea to cut people off from the environment and then expect them to appreciate the environment. That feels like a tangent. It's not totally, because it is on topic, but it is one thing that really annoys me. Why can't I enjoy this environment around me that I'm paying for? I'm paying for you to preserve this. Who are you preserving it for? What is it being preserved for? If not for the health and enjoyment of humanity. Protect the environment, yes. Make sure people are not being idiots when they're enjoying the environment. But to cut us off from the environment, I think it's counterintuitive. Do you guys agree with me on that? Am I just rambling? Does that make sense? It's something that really bothers me. Write me, JLTY@protonmail.com, and let me know. So, here's how I feel at the top. I'll tell you how I feel about fossil fuels. We need fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are good. They are not the enemy. We should embrace them and feel free to embrace them and feel good about that. Fossil fuels are a good thing for justice, for humanity, for progress, all of that. However, there is no doubt that where fossil fuel use is unchecked and unregulated, it creates huge environmental issues. And I know I know you can't believe it because you're talking to Kira Davis, who hates all regulations, but I'm not naive enough to believe that capitalists, people who run big corporations, don't have the tendency to get greedy and ignore the needs of the people below them, right? Ignore the needs of the people who live in the areas that they're mining or dumping waste into or whatever. But I don't think the solution is to eliminate fossil fuels. So there's got to be some compromises we can come to here. What I want to see is something that honors the environment, but also promotes progress and ease of life for those people in the world who struggle financially, who struggle with poverty. So point number one for why I believe fossil fuels are good. They are cost effective. This is without a doubt one of the most attractive things about fossil fuels. And I think that these 2 points go hand in hand. So I'm going to include them in the same little subsection here. And they are readily available. So we know where the fossil fuels are. We know where to go to find them. This isn't new. A counter to that talking point would be that fossil fuels are unsustainable, that they are finite. And I've been hearing that since I was a kid. In fact, I can remember clearly in science class that it's not disputed at all. It's the idea fossil fuels are finite. And there's only so much to have, and soon we're going to drain the whole world of their fossil fuels. And I don't know if that's true or not anymore. It's really hard to judge time-wise as a human being, right? Because we get the span of a century if we're lucky as people on this earth. And so everything's relative. So how many more years of fossil fuels do we have? Like 100, 300, 400? We certainly have more than a generation left. We've got, when I was a kid, I was hearing we were going to run out of fossil fuels by the time I was 30. I'm 46 now, and they're not easing up on the fossil fuels. I mean, we're still finding new areas of fossil fuels. We have not explored the full breadth and depth of this earth yet. I mean, just think of what's in the ocean that we haven't seen. What do they say? Like, we have only explored 1% of the oceans or something. As our technology develops, so will our ability to find fuel that's hidden in the depths of the ocean right now. There is just so much available. I've never been to the Middle East myself, but I study the Middle East a lot, both for what's going on there with the conflicts, and also because fossil fuels, a lot of what we do comes from the Middle East. And one thing that is true about the Middle East is the decadence that oil barons and these Saudi sheikhs live in. You know, where you can go online and you can find pictures of them with their gold toilets or their golden cars and rooms full of gold. And I've had friends who have gone there and said it's just in the kingdom of Saudi Arabia and then other smaller oil nations. Obviously, there are poor people. We're talking about the people who own the resources. That money is just no object. And that is because oil is so plentiful there. There is so much oil in the Middle East still. They know what we don't know. Saudi Arabia is not getting into green energy. They might be doing a few little projects here and there to make the West think that they are, but oil is still very much a viable source there. And it rules the Middle East still to this day. So it's still a viable source. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. It's the cheapest form of energy that we have. I mean, gas, we have gas, we have oil and coal. It's relatively cheap to get these things compared to other forms of energy. It's relatively cheap to disseminate on a mass scale. And let's be honest, it is fossil fuels and the use of fossil fuels for energy that has changed the face of the planet as far as the prosperity of human beings. Fossil fuels are the fuel for the engine of capitalism. Fossil fuels are the fuel for the engine of progress and freedom. And those of us, those nations like America that have learned to harness the potential of fossil fuel have been extremely successful, not only in an aspect of global dominance and capitalist dominance, but also in the aspect of lifting people up from poverty. Every time you eliminate a need, that people have to go get, you give people extra room to take steps towards prosperity. So once you had running water in your home, no longer did one or two people in your household have to spend half the day finding water to wash up with, to drink, to do all of the stuff you need to do with water. No longer did you have to commit someone to that specific job. Now you could just turn on a tap. So now you've got half a day. The water carrier now has half a day of free that they never had before. So you can use that for other things that will help your family or earn you money. When you can turn on a switch and flip on the heater, you don't have to spend half the day going to get wood or finding some other fuel to burn. And which, by the way, coal and oil, those things save our forests. They save our trees from being used for necessary fuel in more poverty-stricken areas. You can read all about, in fact, I was just reading an article the other day on The Economist, a publication that I don't pay for. So I only used my free, but I think I'm going to pay for The Economist coming up because there's a few articles that have been really great lately. But this one was about the environmental cost of wood burning regions in Africa. And because fossil fuels, for many reasons, have not really reached the rural areas, people, in order to survive, are having to burn wood. But there's only so much to go around. And so they're deforesting areas that desperately need trees. That was Ethiopia's issue. A lot of people don't talk about this. I'm sure you're like me and remember the famines of the 80s, and that was a big celebrity cause. By the way, folks, a lot of those famines haven't gone away. They've shifted to other nations, but putting out a big Christmas song didn't save Ethiopia. I hate to tell you. But anyway, even though it's a great and cheesy song, do they know it's Christmas time at all? Yeah, because Ethiopians are idiots. They don't know when it's Christmas. Oh, man. Talk about white privilege. That's the best. I still love the song. I freaking love it. I love the part where Bono's like, tonight, be glad it's them instead of you. It's such an indictment. It's such a little pissy little college age kid indictment. I bet you're just glad it's them and not you. Anyways, those things didn't solve the drought in Ethiopia. The drought in Ethiopia, for all intents and purposes, was really caused by a deforestation. People having to use, because they didn't have fossil fuels for whatever reasons, having to cut down large swaths of forest to fuel their families. And that created a barren kind of wasteland. I have a rudimentary understanding of how trees work, and you need them. And when you take them away from places where you need them, bad things happen. And that's one of the things that happened in Ethiopia. There were some other issues, but that is one thing. So anytime that you give people a resource, an energy resource that makes their lives easier, it frees them up to be more productive in other areas of their lives. I know this isn't an attractive quality of fossil fuels, but it's still a reality of fossil fuels. They fuel our war efforts. And one of the things that has made us a formidable force in the world is our use of fossil fuels. We use them for our ships. We use them for our airplanes. We use them for all our weapons of war. And that is why when you go to war, when two nations go to war, one of the things that, and this is as old as humanity, one of the things you do is you cut off the supply for people. And if you can cut off the supplies, you'll hear stories of invading armies surrounding a city back in the day when people used to congregate in cities, and they would wall the cities up. And they would cut off the supply chain and then wait for a year, 2, 3 years, basically starve out the population.
Politics are becoming more and more divisive every day. My name is Colin Jackson. I'm the co-host of Not Another Political Podcast, where we reject popular opinions and prioritize solutions over partisan dogma. Download Not Another Political Podcast on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast entertainment today.
There's value in having access to fuel when it comes to fighting battles, comes to fighting wars. And the more that you have, the more machines you can power. And that means you can overwhelm your enemy more. And that's been important to keeping us safe in the West. And we have examples going not that long back to World War II. And having dominance in energy is really what won the war for us, including nuclear dominance. I mean, the nuclear bomb is a form of energy, and we learned how to harness it. So that turned out to be very important. So fossil fuels are and energy, the creation of energy, is a very important wartime strategy. So these are fuels that have kept us safe. Imagine if tomorrow China declares war on the United States and we say, okay, we're only going to battle with solar. We can only use anything that's solar powered. We're going to lose. We're going to lose. So I know that you would like, not you, dear listener, but maybe some of you listeners out there, I know that you would like to think that if we just got rid of fossil fuels, that somehow we could still maintain our position of safety and prosperity in this world. But unfortunately, no, the world still depends on fossil fuels. And the nations that learn how to harness it the best and the most are going to be dominant. By the way, another sidebar here, I will tell you that this is another reason why the formation of Space Force is so important. And you can laugh at it all you want right now. But if we're to believe the environmental left, we're coming up on a time pretty soon here where we won't have access to the fuels we need to keep society going as we know it. Do you think society's just going to stop working, going to roll over and die? No, humans are natural explorers. We're going to go out and find those fuels in other parts of the galaxy that we haven't had access to before, technologically speaking. And now that we're moving out into the galaxy, we're going to find all kinds of things out there that are going to be very valuable here on Earth. And how do we decide who owns them and how we get them back? And who owns the moon? I say this all the time. Who owns the moon? Kara, that's a dumb question. Who owns the moon? No one owns the moon. Why not? Why not? Our flag's up there. By the rules of earthly conquering and declaring ownership of a land, it's where you plant your flag. And we have a flag on the moon. And we have footsteps on the moon. We're the only nation that has been to the moon and landed on the moon. I'm saying the moon a lot. Who owns it? It's meaningless now, today. But what about if we figure out that we can get to Mars easily if we establish a base on the moon? Who owns it then? Who's allowed to put a base on the moon so that we can get to Mars first? We get to Mars, we find out that there's fuel that a drop of this fuel could power an entire city for a year. You know? Who gets to say that they own that? This isn't Star Trek, where all the peoples of the universe work together peacefully to help each other. No, somebody's going to want it from us, and we're not going to want to give it to that somebody, and then we're going to have to fight for it. So Space Force is going to be really important in dominating what happens on this front with fossil fuels and fuel and energy moving forward. Donald Trump will go down as one of the most innovative presidents in history because of Space Force. You mark my words. You can make fun of it all you want right now. The reality is, here's another point. The reality is that most of the earth still functions on fossil fuels. And you can try to engineer human behavior as much as you want. It doesn't matter. You have to deal with the way the world is and not the way you wish it could be. And most people depend on fossil fuels. Do you know why? Because most people in this world are poor. Yeah, there's a reason why everybody wants to get into the United States, because we complain a lot about our poverty here and our poor here. But even the poor here in the United States, compared to almost everywhere in the world, even the poor are wealthy. I can remember taking an Uber drive in Atlanta with a guy who was from Somalia. And we started chatting. Like a lot of you, I love to chat up my Uber drivers, see why they drive Uber, like to peek into their lives. It's always a fun little experiment, especially when they're immigrants. I like to know what their American experience has been like. And so we started talking about this guy's American experience. And he was not really impressed with American attitudes. I'll say that. He thought he really felt like Americans were very lazy. And he was saying, oh, I have like 3 jobs. And I love doing my jobs because I can earn as much as I want. I can have as much as I want if I'm willing to go work for it. But he was like, I see people in my neighborhood. I guess he lived in the projects. He was like, I see my people in my neighborhood, and all they do is complain about how they don't get enough money from the government. But they all have TVs. They all have heat in their house. They all have new shoes and food on the table. They get food stamps, and they get their health care is covered. And they're considered poor in this country. In my country, those people would be extremely wealthy. He was like, Americans don't appreciate what they have. So yeah, even our poor are wealthy on the international scale. That's not to dismiss poverty. That's not to dismiss the discomfort of our people here. I'm just putting it in perspective. And what I'm saying is that fossil fuels have helped us get to the point where even our poor people have TVs. Hell, you can go to LA right now and stop in any homeless tent city and find people watching TV and find people with air conditioners in their tent. I kid you not. I am not lying. You can find it somewhere on Google, I'm sure. So even people who live on the streets in this country have access to the Kardashians and all the other gems on TV. So almost the entire world uses fossil fuels, as I just said. Here's the breakdown in 2021 of how many people use fossil fuel. So just know that I know there are a lot of people out there listening to this who really feel like we should ban fossil fuels. And in fact, I have heard mention of lockdowns, quote, for climate emergencies until the climate situation changes, which should be a non-starter if you're a thinking human being. But there are a lot of people who feel like there are genuinely intellectuals or people who call themselves intellectuals out there who believe that we need to elect a president who will come to office tomorrow and ban fossil fuels, like immediately. They think that is the way. No weaning people off this stuff. You just cut the cord and then let people adjust. It's just a pipe dream to believe that we could force the entire planet to end their use of fossil fuels overnight. And you know what? I just paused when I said that. I just paused for a second because in my mind I thought, is it that much of a pipe dream? Because I would have told you that it was impossible to close the entire world. And we did that this year. But see, that has advantages for governments, doesn't it? See, closing up the entire world doesn't take any power away from a government entity. It gives them power. It consolidates their power. So there's no reason for a government entity to oppose that, really. The only reason is if you have honest and good people in government, which, we all know how that goes. But with fossil fuels, no, I really don't think that would happen because there's no power advantage to doing that. Do you know what I mean? Like, we could get rid of fossil fuels tomorrow here in the United States, but if we get it, I've just told you about how we depend on it for our weapons of war and our national defense and all of that. If we end our dependence on fossil fuels, and China doesn't, right? That's going to be an imbalance of power. By the way, that's what China wants right now. You know who's leading the green energy push? China. You know who's the worst offender in climate change issues? China, right? They're not going to reduce anything. They're not going to do anything. They don't care. They don't really care about green energy. They certainly don't care about the environment, but they know that green energy weakens the national defense of their enemies. And so if we depend more on green energy because it is undependable right now, that we're going to be weaker. And if we're not creating our own energy, we're going to be vulnerable, right? Because if we have to buy it from Russia and then Russia decides to pull the plug one day, we're screwed. If we have to keep buying it, this is one of the great things that Donald Trump did when he opened up our energy sector so we could be independent. So we don't have to keep bending over for the Middle East if they're doing things like killing gay people or preventing women from jiving. You know, we don't have to keep ignoring those terrible things that they're doing to their own people just because we want to heat our homes. We can do it ourselves. So you may not like Donald Trump, but that was actually a good thing for the strength of our economy. You should always find out where the green energy stuff is coming from. Who's producing the stuff? Who produces the windmills? Where do we get the steel for the windmills? Where do you think? I don't know. A lot of my audience is smart enough to already know the answer to this question. But if you don't know, do you want to know what the answer is? I'm going to tell you the answer. It's China. Do you think it's a coincidence that China keeps trying to push us to sign all these treaties, these environmental treaties? You think China doesn't even care about their own people? They're murdering people right now in concentration camps because of their religion. China does not care. China has been forcing abortions for decades upon women who are sometimes days away from delivering infants. They don't care about people. They don't care about American people. They want you to A, buy more of their products, and B, be weakened so that they can be strong. So the idea that, first of all, the idea that we would simultaneously prevent every nation from using fossil fuels is a pipe dream. It will not happen. Some nations will just take advantage of it to overcome their enemies. But also, the world is dependent on fossil fuels still hugely. Don't believe the hype. We're nowhere near switching over to renewables. Nowhere near. I don't care what your state governor says about how he's going to have you on electric cars in the next 3 years. Let me break it down for you. 33% of the world uses oil for energy needs. 24% of the world uses natural gas. Coal is consumed at 27%. Nuclear energy is 4%. Hydroelectric is 6%. And renewables represent a paltry 5% of the world's energy. It is unrealistic to believe that the world will keep on humming without fossil fuels. It's been the engine of progress for everybody. Remember the Kyoto Treaty? The same thing applies to this Paris Accord. Let me break this down for you for a second before we move on to our final points here. The Kyoto Treaty was in 1997. That was during the Bush years. Remember Bush, who wouldn't sign the Kyoto Treaty, and that made him the devil? And he was Satan incarnate. Quite literally, actually. I think the imams in the Middle East made him didn't they declare him like this great Satan or something? I don't know. But he was universally hated for that. I find it to be ridiculously, pathetically hypocritical that today George Bush is a hero of the progressive left. I remember when y'all were calling him out his every name. You guys said he was the most evil person on earth, that he was racist, homophobic, and he was a greedy capitalist pig who didn't care about the environment. I remember. So don't try to charm me with your, oh, look how cute George Bush is now. He paints pictures and he's friends with the Obamas. Y'all hated him. Take a second to think about that. Take a second to think about how your notions of a politician change as soon as that politician is out of office. Maybe there's something wrong with the way with the way you're looking at these people. Sidebar. Anyways, everybody loves George Bush now, but back then he was there are a few honest brokers out there. Typically, y'all are libertarians who still are at least honest enough to still hate George Bush. I never hated the man, but I respect you. If you hated him then and you still hate him, good for you. At least you're consistent. You know what I mean? Mad respect for that. But he wouldn't sign this treaty. Everybody said, okay, this is the United States is going to ruin the world and we're so selfish and blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what has happened to emissions, to carbon emissions that the Kyoto Treaty was supposed to curb? Guess what's happened to them in the 4 years since we've signed it? Carbon emissions globally have increased by 50%. 50%. It was useless. What was the Kyoto Treaty then? You should ask. I would hope some of you at least asked. And some of y'all should be asking what the Paris Accord is. Because too many of you are just okay to stop at a name. I talk about names of bills and ideas on the show all the time, don't I? Right? Critical race theory sounds nice because it's got race and theory in it. The Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act here in California. Doesn't that sound nice? There's nothing to do with either. It's about early prisoner release. You know, everybody, there's too many incurious people out there. If we're not signing the Paris Accord, or if our previous president refused to sign it, instead of automatically stopping at, oh, he must be a capitalist pig, why don't you ask why? What's in it? Well, like the Kyoto Treaty, the Paris Accord Treaty doesn't do anything to reduce carbon emissions. What it does is it puts international players in charge of American environmental policy. And no other nation should be in charge of our policy. We should not be in charge of any other nation's policy. I mean, if you're shouting at me right now and saying, why not? We've got to be team players. It's New World Order, whatever it is, what term we're using, globalism or whatever we're using today for it. What country are you okay with America making decisions for? Well, Kira, they're already doing it in this country and that country and XYZ. Okay, you don't seem too happy with that. Why are you encouraging it then? If it's not a good thing there, then it's not a good thing anywhere. I don't know why we would give the sovereignty of our laws over to other nations that have ill intentions towards us. I'm using China right now because right now that's our number one enemy when it comes to national defense and safety in this country. Why wouldn't China sign a treaty that will put them in charge of our environmental laws if they know that they can reduce our fossil fuel consumption to a level that hobbles us while they continue to ramp up fossil fuel use? Also, while they continue to build out military outposts in the middle of the ocean, which is happening right now? Why wouldn't you? And then why wouldn't you put stories out there? China controls their media, right? But that also means they control ours. They control ours. Our people who are there have to abide by Chinese law in order to stay there and report. So that means a lot of times they have to become state-run media. CNN as much as admitted it 2 years ago. What we do have to abide by what the Chinese say, or we can't stay here and report on what's going on. We just found out that the AP, Associated Press, which is the gold standard in my business for reporting, we use what we call the AP style book in reporting. That means they set the terms for what your article looks like, for what terms you use, how you capitalize things. They're the gold standard, literally. We just found out the AP has offices in the Hamas buildings in the Gaza Strip. They house themselves with terrorist organizations. So is it any wonder that the only news we ever get about Hamas is, quote, good news from the AP? You see, they have to report these ways because that's the only way they get to stay where they are. So China knows that they can bend some of the media framing to their will. And then they can make Americans feel guilty for using too many fossil fuels, all the while they're ramping up. This feels so strong. This feels like such a strong episode. And I can imagine that there are listeners out there right now going, oh my gosh, Kira, QAnon much? Are you obsessed with China much? I promise you, I'm not QAnon and I'm not crazy, but I'm a reporter. And, I work in this business. And so China is a subject that we cover a lot. And unfortunately, most people only read headlines on China, but they don't really look into what is actually going on. This is actually a really big problem. And these Paris Accords are a great example of that. A lot of folks out there in my listening audience don't know what's in the Paris Accord. They just know it's supposed to reduce climate change. So if we don't want to sign it, that means we're the bad people. But we're the only people who, in 2019, we were the only nation on Earth that actually reduced our carbon emissions. And we hadn't signed either of these things. The Accord or the Kyoto Treaty. By the way, I was assured that the world would be destroyed because the U.S. did not sign on to the Kyoto Treaty. And that was 1997. Maybe we need to ratchet it down just a tad. Do you know what I'm saying?
Politics are becoming more and more divisive every day. My name is Colin Jackson. I'm the co-host of Not Another Political Podcast, where we reject popular opinions and prioritize solutions over partisan dogma. Download Not Another Political Podcast on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast entertainment today.
Green energy is expensive. And no matter how many tax incentives or grants we give for people to use green energy, it doesn't take the cost of green energy down. And that doesn't mean it won't ever come down, but it's because people don't want it. And this is where the market forces come in, right? You've got to make green energy palatable to people so that they will want to have it. But I live in California, which our governor often touts as one of the greatest places on earth. And we have the 5th largest economy in the world. And we have all these things to brag about. But we can't keep the power on in the summer because 30% of our energy here in the state comes from green energy that is absolutely, it's not viable at all. And it costs so much. So every time the government forces us to take on green energy, we necessarily raise the cost of fossil fuels, which we're all still using. So now you've made it harder for that poor family in East LA to pay their heating bill or their AC bill. And I don't know if you've been in LA in August or September, but it's pretty much hell. I mean, so you've been in Phoenix, in August or September. Can you imagine Phoenix without AC? But AC is not going to run on wind farms or solar farms. It's not, folks. And it doesn't. You know how I know? Because I live in California where we have rolling blackouts because the grid cannot maintain. We are densely populated, but the grid we have cannot maintain the level of population that we have. We need fossil fuels, and we have fossil fuels. It's not like they aren't there, people. They are there. We're just not allowed to use them. Green energy takes up way too much space. Wind energy takes up, I had to go look this up. Wind energy takes up 71 acres per megawatt. So for 1 megawatt of power, you need 71 acres of land. Solar takes up 44 acres. Hydro, a whopping 315 acres per single megawatt. So to put this another way, a solar farm needs about, and I'm reading this from Heritage Foundation study on nuclear energy, and we're going to talk about this in a minute. A solar farm needs roughly 45 square miles of land to produce the same amount of energy as an average nuclear power plant, and a wind energy farm would need roughly 260 square miles. I know I've mentioned it on this show before, but if you've never been by a wind farm, first of all, it is quite a sight to behold. It's sort of amazing to see these structures rise out of the mountains of the earth. But I do live in an area where there's wind power. You can see it on your drive between here and Phoenix, between here and Palm Springs. And it's ugly. And it takes up miles and miles and miles and miles of pristine landscape. In fact, the rich folks, I believe in Martha's Vineyard, were protesting against wind farms getting put off of the shore there because it would ruin their, view. And you know what? I don't even mind. Yes, those people are hypocrites because they're all green energy freaks, but I get it because, hell, I have worked so hard just to get out of where we were to the middle class. If my work got me to the point where I could afford a mansion next to the Obamas in Martha's Vineyard, I don't want to be looking at wind farms. That's not what I pay for. So I do not blame them at all. I blame their hypocrisy, but I don't blame them not wanting to see that because I've seen a wind farm and it's ugly as hell. You seen a solar farm? Same thing. So there's a lot in the desert between here and Phoenix as well. Huge solar farms that actually increase the heat, as you can imagine, because you only need to use a tiny portion of your brain to understand that these panels don't just absorb, but they also reflect. And that's releasing a lot of that heat back into the atmosphere, and it kills fries birds. I mean, I don't care about birds, but I know some environmentalists out there are real concerned about birds. So if you're concerned about birds, you shouldn't be in support of solar energy. Solar energy on your house is a great idea. A panel or two and can help you run in case of an emergency and lower your bills. I am in favor of people getting a solar panel for your home. But solar panels to fuel an entire city, and who knows, maybe if we all had solar panels on our homes, eventually we wouldn't need that much solar energy to fuel entire cities. Who knows? But we're not there yet. So right now, solar energy is working against what environmentalists hold most dearly, which is the environment. Renewable energy takes up more environment, takes up more space. It doesn't help the environment. It harms the environment. Also, please tell me where you make the things for green energy and how do you make them? Do you make green energy from green energy? Do you make a solar panel from recycled parts? Do you make a wind farm blade, a windmill blade from recycled parts? No. It's steel, which you make in a steel plant, which is hot and not friendly to the environment. You can't build windmills without steel mills. You can't build solar panels without lithium. Where do you think all these things come from? So your green energy is just encouraging destructive mining practices elsewhere. Don't get me started on what the lithium trade is doing to African kids. It's disgusting. And we're all addicted to it. And again, I don't think that it's wrong because it's progress, but it is wrong that the environmental progressives hide the fact that what we're doing in order to get this renewable energy is actually harming people and harming the environment, just in places we can't see. I think that's dishonest. My heart is for the poor. And anytime we make their lives more difficult, I think that is abhorrent. And we should not be in favor of that. And I don't know how environmentalists can justify it. I think because most environmentalists are comfortable. It's not the poor who are protesting for the environment. They're too busy trying to live. And you're busy trying to make their lives worse, more expensive, harder to live. So I'm not ever going to be in favor of something that makes life more difficult for poor people. Fossil fuels, the downside of fossil fuels is they do take a lot of resources to get out of the ground. And sometimes those resources can cause pollution. And like I said at the top of the show, there have been many incidents across the history of this country when it comes to fossil fuels. I mean, just look at the Industrial Revolution, right? How dirty things got. Like there are plenty of companies who will dump toxic waste into local neighborhoods if they can get away with it. So let's not pretend that everybody's just on the up and up here and the people who make the fossil fuels have nothing but the best of intentions. There's plenty of companies out there who will get away with what they can, with making people sick, with dirtying up an environment that they don't have to live in if it's going to line their pockets. Let's be honest about that. So it is right for the government to step in and make some rules to protect citizens. I fully support that. I fully get it. But see, when the government's goal is to protect some other energy sector, some other sector, right? Like, well, we want to encourage renewables. We want to encourage solar energy. And your focus is not on people. That's when it becomes a power grab. And the renewable energy lobby in this country is a power grab right now. It's no better than the fossil fuel industry. People are last in all these equations that we're making up. It's a war on universal prosperity, I think, the push for renewable energy. Because like I just laid out, when you're free from having to deal with these daily immediate needs, you are free to be innovative. Listen, this is something we don't think about very much, and it's an unpleasant thought, but this is just the truth. Have you ever wondered why all of the worst ideas come out of the arts sector or the humanities or philosophy sector? I mean, there's a lot of interesting ideas, but a lot of like the ideas that people like you and me who just go to work every day look at and go, what? Like bohemian living and sexual communes and like whatever, hedonism, like whatever philosophy or otherwise, quote, strange or intellectual idea. It always feels like they buck tradition or they go against what has worked for the rest of us traditionally. And some good ones come out of there too, by the way. Some good ideas have I shouldn't be so... I'm an artist, so I shouldn't be so disparaging. Some good ideas come out of there too. But have you ever wondered why so many ideas come from... Why isn't it you? You're at home. You've got great ideas. Why aren't you the one changing how we teach race in schools or how we look at the nature of male and female relationships, like some of our most famous poets did? Because in order to pursue higher pursuits, quote, higher pursuits like intellectualism and art, and do it full time, you have to be rich. So it's always wealthy people that have the time and the luxury to sit around and ponder the nature of humanity and ponder how if we just tinkered with this and did that, how we would change anything. Our worst ideas come from the richest of people that we teach in our schools right now as world changers, as game changers in a very positive light. as if they cared at all about poor people. They were all rich people who had nothing better to do than sit around and think. That's why a lot of these ideas come out of academia and the artist community. It's rich people who have time to think about this stuff. You don't have time to sit around and devise ways of how to look at gender or how to look at marriage. Old tradition. Like, I know y'all think that a lot of what you see these days has just never been seen before, but there's nothing new under the sun. But really what we're seeing is a bunch of people who have an idea that they are more intelligent than most of us and more capable than most of us, and who have decided that the prosperity that there is in the world now, that's all the prosperity that should go around. And it should be concentrated with the people who understand how to use prosperity correctly and safely, and the rest of us, well, we're going to get cut off. They get to use private jets to travel around the world, and we need to use electric cars to travel not outside of 20 miles outside our home for the good of Earth. I do see a lot of the environmental movement as it currently stands as a war on prosperity and a war on poverty, and it's a war against poor people. It's a war on poor people, not a war on poverty, a war on poor people.
Politics are becoming more and more divisive every day. My name is Colin Jackson. I'm the co-host of Not Another Political Podcast, where we reject popular opinions and prioritize solutions over partisan dogma. Download Not Another Political Podcast on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast entertainment today.
All right. There's got to be a compromise, though, because, as I said, there's good and bad things to fossil fuels. I think fossil fuels are superior. I think they're a gift from God. I do not think we should spit in the face of fossil fuels. They're the only thing that we don't need for anything else. Like, if you want to make water, I know we have this fantasy of making water a source of energy, but water we drink, water we irrigate with. We need water for so much. Water we need to live. We need it for so much. Imagine if we started using water and then depleting the water resources of the earth. That would be much more devastating than depleting oil, right? We don't eat oil or drink oil. We use it to make lots of stuff that we like, but we don't need it. You know, we don't consume it in our bodies. So imagine using up water and the damage that would do. I was just reading this article. I know we're going long because I've been just rambling and I'm sorry. I was reading this article on reforestation. So there's a part of the environmental movement is to plant tree forests in deserts. I guess on the surface that sounds like a good idea. Like, oh, the desert is bad. It's dry and blah, blah, blah. We put trees in there and we have more plants that release, that soak up carbon emissions. And that's great. Well, this is human arrogance. Like with the idea that we're going to go in and tinker with the environment to help, we're only going to ever hurt. Hollywood, I'm going to write this movie someday too, I am, because Hollywood always tells you, they always give us these movies that are about the apocalypse, right? The end of the world. And in Hollywood, they're running out of ideas. Like, they're so uncreative that every apocalypse is caused by humans using up too many natural resources. That's always how it is, right? We either nuked ourselves into the apocalypse or we used up all our resources against the warnings of people, and now this is what we get. I don't think that is a realistic look at how that environmental apocalypse would come about. I actually think it would come about from people trying to do good, trying to tinker with nature when we have no business doing it. This example of reforestation is a great example, because it turns out that in places where trees don't belong, it's bad. Deserts aren't bad by nature. You need to decide why an area is drought. Like in Ethiopia, great. It would be a great idea to reforest the places that people had to deforest in order to survive. Trees were supposed to be there. Now they're gone. Put them back. But one mistake environmentalists make is that they put back trees that don't belong there. So they're invasive species. And then they create more environmental problems for the locals. But they want trees that are going to grow quickly, right? They're short-sighted. So that's harmful. But also, another thing is that if you introduce trees into areas that don't need trees, you're upsetting the balance of that environment. Either those trees won't survive, or the other things that have to survive there in order to make the area palatable can't survive. I was reading an article on mongabay.com, and it's called Bad Science, Planting Frenzy Misses the Grasslands for the Trees. And it's about how this plan of forestation it's not based on science, but emotion. And the maps they created of Africa, they wanted to start in Africa, and they created these maps of areas that were dry and without trees, but they didn't ask why the areas were without trees. And so they label all of the areas as deforested when some of them are just plains, or just desert areas. They're supposed to be that way. One of the gentlemen they interviewed said he's a scientist, these maps have been extremely damaging. It was really superficial, bad science, but then international policies are feeding into this. The vast areas then became targets for reforestation supported by the World Bank, the IUCN, and the German government, and so on. At the heart of many of disagreements lie muddled up ideas. When is an area a, quote, forest? And what is a degraded forest? How is it different from a grassland or a savanna with trees? How far back in time do you go to see what the original habitat of the area was like? Does a forest always trump a non-forested area? We're messing with things we have no business messing with. Fossil fuels don't intrude on the other things we need to live as human beings. Look at ethanol. Look at the disaster that ethanol is. We still try to push it. Now it's a subsidy. This is why you should not let the government get their fingers in anything, because they never get out. It's a subsidy now. But you know what it's done? It's reduced the availability of corn crops, which ups the price of feed for cattle, which we desperately need. It ups the price of other vegetables or other crops, because those crops get planted less because they make more money because they're not subsidized by the government. And now the vegetables that you need in your food desert of downtown LA or wherever you live that social justice warriors like to tell us don't get enough healthy foods. Yeah, well, when they do get healthy foods, they're super expensive because we subsidize ethanol, which is made from corn, which we use to help solve mass starvation. It's ridiculous. What's a compromise? Nuclear energy. Nuclear energy. When I was a kid, bad word. To this day, I could not convince my mother that nuclear energy is the most environmentally friendly way to produce power. The French get this. They're like one of the few people on Earth that have figured this out, believe it or not. We don't seem to be able to grasp it. We've had a few accidents that are cause for concern, but nuclear energy overall is actually very safe, and it's only gotten safer over the years. And when we think of unsafe nuclear energy, we think of 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl, but those were like first generation nuclear plants. We're on like fourth generation or something. I live miles down the road from a third generation nuclear plant. In fact, it's what changed my mind about nuclear power, because when I moved here and I realized how close I was to the San Onofre plant, which was still online, it's not online anymore. And when it went offline, our bills went up by about 200%, by the way. But when I first got here, it was online, and my energy bill was like $200 a month. And I was scared. I was like, well, shoot, what if this thing goes nuts one day? And I started researching like mostly escape routes, but also like iodine and things that you should have on hand in case there is an accident. But it led me down a rabbit hole of researching nuclear power. And what I realized was, it's actually safer than a lot of forms of energy that we use. It's actually really safe. And yes, a big accident could have, quote, big environmental consequences, but even that, the chances of a big accident, the way that the technology is, I don't have time to get into it on the show today, but the way the technology is formed, there are so many fail-safes that an accident would look more like Fukushima. Sorry. Is that the Japanese plant, right? That suffered during the tidal wave and the earthquake and the tidal wave a couple years ago. And it was just kind of leaking radioactive water into the ocean. And it was like everyone was scared and it was a disaster. And not that leaking all that water into the ocean was good for the ocean. But no one died at that plant. It didn't create some kind of unlivable situation for Japan. We have an outsized notion of what a nuclear accident looks like, mainly because of A, Chernobyl, which had a lot of mitigating factors, and B, because of our media and the reaction to our nuclear disasters. So it turns out that 3 Mile Island, the government probably didn't need to evacuate all those people, but that was the story. That was the story. And they did that to be safe or whatever. I'm not going to make judgments, but what happened on that island was not the environmental disaster that we always were promised it would be. But it was the handling of that disaster that soured people on the idea of nuclear energy. And nuclear energy is clean, it's cheap, and it takes up very little space. And it could really be a great compromise for all of us. And it's never been safer. And the technology only keeps expanding. This seems like something that both sides of this equation could come together on easily. But there just seems to be this desperate clinging to solar and wind as if that is the solution to all our problems. And it is not. It is actually the opposite. It's going to create more problems for us. So I can't help but think that solar and wind are connected to a political agenda that has nothing to do with prosperity for human beings, because we actually have found the thing that could provide cheap, affordable, plentiful power to millions and millions and millions of people, and yet we're not allowed to build them, not allowed to build any more reactors in this country. I think that is a great solution. And I think if you do your research into nuclear power and how it works these days, you would agree with me. Green energy requires, favorable weather conditions and backup powers. Like, what if it can't come online? And you just heard about how much space that green energy takes up for just a small section of a region. So imagine how much more space the backup energy would have to take. Here's the rest of this report from the Heritage Energy reporter. Nuclear reactors are online and generating power 93% of the time, compared with wind, which is 37% of the time, and solar, which is 26% of the time. And while most nuclear power plants in the United States are licensed to operate for 60 years, the operating life of renewables is roughly half as long. Radiation itself is a common public concern, but not well understood. Radiation is part of our everyday lives: flying in an airplane, eating bananas and carrots, sunbathing, getting medical scans. Simply living on planet Earth all expose a person to more radiation than living within 50 miles of a nuclear power plant. Radiation is an inherent and, to some degree, necessary feature of life. But fear has caused unnecessary environmental harm and costs. While visiting Fukushima, founder of Environmental Progress, Michael Schellenberger, challenged the Japanese government's colossal efforts to remove thousands of, quote, contaminated topsoil. Thousands of tons of contaminated topsoil. The response he got was shockingly frank. Every scientist and radiation expert in the world who comes here says the same thing. We don't need to reduce radiation levels. We're doing it because the people want us to. Another of the concerns is nuclear waste. There are 81,000 tons of nuclear waste from commercial power reactors in the United States. That represents all the nuclear waste from every commercial reactor in the United States since 1957. No more than a football field 10 yards deep. For reference, the International Renewable Energy Agency estimates that the U.S. will have 170,000 to 1 million tons of waste from solar panels by 2030. While the politics of nuclear waste management have bogged down in the United States, it is technically a solvable challenge. The nuclear industry in Finland, for instance, is showing the world how it can be done by building a deep geologic repository to permanently isolate waste from people and the environment. So I think nuclear energy, especially as it stands today in 2021, is a great resource and a great way to appease both sides of this argument. Safer for the environment and creates cheaper, constantly renewable energy. We have this at our fingertips. We're not using it because of fear, and we're letting Hollywood dictate what we imagine clean energy to be, and it's not viable. Tell me your thoughts. Have I hit any points today that make sense to you or that you agree with or disagree with? Write me JLTY@protonmail.com, JLTY@protonmail.com. Don't forget to sign up for davisnation.locals.com for a community of people who discuss things like this and other things freely and every day, and meet people who are like-minded and in a place where you feel safe. And there's bonus JLTY episodes over there. There's bonus video over there. If you liked the interview with Daryl Harrison this week on critical race theory, catch the whole interview. It was well over an hour long. Catch the whole interview over at Davis Nation. I posted the video so you can see him talking. Lots of fun. Set aside the weekend of the July 22nd, 23rd, 24th for a live show. I'm still waiting to hear back from the venue, but we're planning that. That's coming up. I'll have more details as soon as I get them for you. And that's it. I will talk to you guys next time. Until then, every now and then, take a few moments to stop and listen to yourself.
The FCB Radio Network. First class broadcasting worldwide.